On live TV in front of millions, a scream broke the silence, but what came after left the nation speechless. It was the kind of moment that makes producers lean forward in their chairs, that makes viewers at home instinctively reach for their phones to record. Kellyanne Conway, seasoned political strategist and former Trump advisor, was no stranger to heated exchanges. But this time, her voice wasn't just sharp, it was trembling with fury. Echoing through the studio like a storm breaking against glass, the cameras caught every flicker of her expression. Her eyes narrowed, her gestures sharper, each word meant to slice through her opponent. The hosts tried to step in, their polite smiles stretched thin, but Conway's volume drowned them. Out. This was no longer a debate. It was a spectacle. Viewers could feel the tension radiating off the screen, the electricity of confrontation sparking in real time, and then there was Jasmine Crockett. Seated across from Conway, she did not flinch, while Conway's anger surged like a tidal wave. Crockett sat anchored, composed, the very image of steadiness, her eyes locked on her opponent, her hands calmly folded, as if she had anticipated this storm all along. The contrast was almost cinematic. Rage on one side of the table, unshakable. Calm on the other. The audience in the studio exchanged uneasy glances. Was this really happening? Was a nationally televised discussion unraveling into a shouting match? Social media lit up within seconds. Clips were posted in real time, captions screaming in all caps, "Conway loses it live in Crockett?" Unbothered. What was unfolding wasn't just a political argument, it was a collision of two very different styles of power. One tried to dominate through volume and force, the other chose restraint, dignity, and patience. Every second stretched longer than the last. Conway's rant showed no signs of slowing, her words spilling over themselves, desperate to command attention. Yet strangely, it was Crockett's silence that commanded the room. Her calmness was louder than any scream. Her stillness felt deliberate, almost strategic, as though she knew the moment would flip end when it did. The world would be watching, but the reason Conway was screaming is where the story truly begins. This clash wasn't just another cable news shouting match. It unfolded at a time when the country was raw, divided, and hungry for moments that revealed who leaders truly were. Politics had become theater, but behind every performance, reputations were on the line. For Kellyanne Conway, a veteran of the Trump years, it was another chance to flex her brand of sharp-tongued dominance. For Jasmine Crockett, a rising Democratic firebrand, it was an opportunity to show a new kind of leadership, one rooted not in noise, but in conviction. The backdrop was unmistakable. Years of polarization had left Americans weary of slogans and spin. The public had grown cynical, yet they leaned in for moments of authenticity. Conway's voice carried the weight of her past, the architect of alternative facts, a symbol of the combative, unapologetic style that defined a political era. She came into the studio armed with that same force, certain that volume and bravado would once again bend the conversation in her favor. But across from her sat someone who represented something different. Jasmine Crockett's story was not forged in press rooms or campaign war councils, but in community halls, courtrooms, and the gritty everyday struggles of ordinary people. She wasn't just another guest, she was part of a new generation of leaders who embodied diversity, resilience, and identity-driven pride. Her presence itself challenged the notion that politics had to be performed through aggression. For many watching, she stood as proof that composure could be its own kind of weapon. The stakes couldn't have been higher. In a country where television moments can make or break careers, this confrontation was more than a clash of personalities. It was credibility on trial. Conway risked confirming what her critics had long said, that her power relied on chaos, not truth. Crockett, on the other hand, risked being dismissed if she faltered, if she allowed herself to be drowned out by the noise. Millions were not just watching two women argue. They were watching to see which approach in grrr or restraint would win in the court of public opinion. And for the audience that craved validation, identity, and pride, this was more than politics. It was symbolic warfare. A black congresswoman facing off against a white conservative strategist was never going to be read as just a debate. Every raised eyebrow, every shift in tone carried layers of meaning about race, gender, and power in America. Every moment mattered because it represented something larger than the people on stage. What made this so compelling was the unpredictability. Nobody knew how Crockett would respond. Would she match fire with fire? Would she retreat? Or would she carve out a new path entirely? The tension was thick, not only because of Conway's scream, but because the audience sensed this wasn't just another viral spat, was a turning point. If Crockett held her ground with dignity, she wouldn't just win the moment. She could shift the culture. And so, as millions tuned in, the question wasn't simply, who is right? It was who will embody the kind of leadership America needs now. Because in this era, perception was everything. What happened in that studio would not stay in that studio. It would ripple out to social media, to living rooms, to the national conversation about what power should look like in the 21st century. What happened next would ripple far beyond the studio walls. To understand the explosion, we need to know the woman behind the scream, to understand the force of Kellyanne Conway's scream. You first have to understand the story of Kellyanne herself. For years, she has been a fixture in the American political theater, a strategist who rose from the world of polling and consultancy into the bright, unrelenting spotlight of Trump-era Washington. Her name became synonymous with spin, her face, a near-constant presence on television where she sparred with hosts, deflected questions, and never seemed rattled, no matter how tough the interview became. She was not a passive figure in history, she shaped it. One combative media hit at a time, Conway's defining moment came early in the Trump presidency. She coined a phrase that would hang over her legacy: alternative facts. To some it was a slip, an awkward attempt to justify falsehoods about inauguration crowd sizes. But to others, it crystallized exactly what she represented: a willingness to bend reality, to reshape truth, to frame perception until it bent in the direction she wanted. That moment set the tone for the years to come. Conway became the smiling face of Trump's defenses. No matter how outrageous, no matter how implausible, she would not back down. She thrived on friction, and the more hostile the questioning, the more energized she seemed to become. Her style was both admired and despised. Admirers saw her as quick on her feet, clever, relentless. Critics saw a master of misdirection, someone who treated truth as malleable clay. But one thing was undeniable: Conway knew how to command a stage. She did not shrink in the face of confrontation. She invited it, relished it, and wielded it as her chosen weapon. Conflict wasn't an obstacle to her, which her oxygen, and yet contradictions trailed her at every step. She spoke often of dignity, of protecting America's values, of preserving tradition. But her words and interviews were laced with derision, mockery, and dismissiveness. She would accuse opponents of arrogance while wielding arrogance herself. She would call for respect while interrupting with cutting asides. She would decry incivility while elevating it into an art form. For every claim to principle, there was a performance that undermined it. This paradox defined Conway's role as both strategist and public figure. She built her reputation on being unshakable, but that steadiness was always loud, always combative, always threaded with disdain for whoever sat across from her. The more her opponents squirmed, the more satisfied she seemed. To her, rattling others was proof of her own control. And for years, this worked. It worked in interviews. It worked on debate stages. It worked on cable news panels. She mastered the spectacle of confrontation, and she turned it into a career-defining skill. But like any skill, it carried risks. Because when your entire brand is built on volume and disruption, what happens when someone refuses to be disrupted? What happens when your storm meets a wall of calm? Conway had built her empire on the assumption that louder meant stronger. But that assumption would be tested in the most public way possible. On that night, in that studio, Conway brought her trademark style. She leaned forward in her chair. She interrupted with practiced precision. She filled the air with fast talking, sharp-edged retorts, a fusillade of phrases meant to overwhelm, to bury her opponent under noise. She was in her element, or at least, she thought she was. But beneath the surface, a different reality was waiting. Because in the era of viral clips and instant reactions, the old rules had changed. Outshouting someone was no longer enough. Viewers weren't just listening to what was said. They were watching how it was said. They were watching composure, restraint, tone, body language. And in that environment, Conway's style risked looking less like strength and more like desperation. That's the irony of Conway's legacy. She built her image as the embodiment of control, yet the very tactics she relied on exposed cracks in that control. Every smirk, every scoff, every dismissive interruption broadcast something to viewers that words alone could not conceal. For many, she became less a symbol of poise and more a symbol of how arrogance can disguise itself as confidence. And that is why her scream on live television mattered. It wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a carefully constructed persona, straining under pressure. It was the moment where the weapon she had wielded for so long seemed to turn against her, amplifying not strength, but fragility. The scream revealed something raw, something unscripted, something that undercut the illusion she had cultivated. For once, the master of spin looked rattled. Kellyanne Conway's career had taught her how to win moments by overpowering her opponents. But the night she screamed, she was about to learn that sometimes power isn't in the shouting. Sometimes it's in the silence that follows. But across the stage sat a very different kind of fighter. To truly understand the power of Jasmine Crockett's calm reply, you have to start long before the cameras ever found her. Crockett's story is not one of privilege or backroom political deals. It's a story grounded in grit, in a relentless fight for justice, and in the kind of sacrifice that doesn't make headlines, but changes lives all the same. Before she was a face on national television, she was a voice for those who rarely got a microphone. Born and raised in St. Louis, Crockett grew up watching her community navigate the challenges of inequality, systemic neglect, and the quiet frustrations of people who felt unheard. Those early lessons stayed with her. She didn't enter law school to chase prestige. She entered to protect the people who could not protect themselves. As an attorney, she fought for civil rights, defending individuals who were too often trampled by the very systems that promised justice. While others looked for comfortable careers, she took the tougher path, representing the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the overlooked. Every client was more than a case filet, was a battle against forces larger than them. And she fought with everything she had. But Crockett wasn't just a lawyer. She was an activist, a presence on the front lines of protests, a defender of free speech, and a steady figure in communities searching for accountability. When neighborhoods demanded answers about policing and inequality, she stood with them, not above them. She listened before she spoke, and when she did speak, people leaned in. It wasn't volume that gave her words weight, which authenticity. She didn't need to manufacture outrage. She had lived in the middle of it, side by side with the people she served. That commitment carried her into public office. In Texas, she stepped into the state legislature, where she quickly gained a reputation as fearless, sharp, and unwilling to be intimidated. She was known for grilling opponents with surgical precision, for cutting through hypocrisy without raising her voice. She didn't rattle easily, and when colleagues underestimated her, they learned quickly that her calm demeanor wasn't weakness, it was strategy. It was the armor of someone who had faced far worse outside the chamber walls and come out stronger. Every time her rise was anything but accidental, Crockett embodied the next wave of American politics. Unapologetically black, unapologetically progressive, and unapologetically unwilling to be silenced. For many, she represented the hope that politics could look different. Not polished sound bites or manipulative spin, but raw honesty and grounded conviction. She carried herself with the weight of her community's struggles, but also with a sharp wit that could turn any insult back on its source. She was serious but never stiff, strong but always human. And it wasn't just her policy positions or her activism that built admiration. It was her sacrifices. She knew the toll public service demanded. Long hours away from family. Attacks from opponents who reduced her to labels rather than recognizing her work. The emotional weight of fighting battles where victories were often incremental and defeats were personal. Yet she stayed the course, driven not by self-promotion, but by purpose. Every time she walked into a courtroom, every time she stepped into a legislative hearing, every time she raised her hand to speak, it was with the quiet understanding that her voice carried more than her own story. It carried the stories of those who entrusted her with their struggles. That is why. When Jasmine Crockett walked into that studio opposite Kellyanne Conway, she carried with her more than preparation. She carried a lifetime of resilience, of refusing to be shouted down in courtrooms and legislative halls. In protests where voices clashed louder than any microphone could capture, she carried the discipline of a lawyer, the heart of an activist, and the grit of a fighter who had never relied on theatrics to win battles. She knew who she was, and that knowledge was her shield. And so when Conway's scream cut across the studio, Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She didn't need to. Her entire life had prepared her for moments just like that, moments when someone tried to use chaos as a weapon, when noise tried to drown out truth. Crockett understood instinctively what so many others missed, that calmness in the face of fury is not passivity. It is power. It is the refusal to surrender dignity, no matter how loud the attack becomes. Those very qualities, the patience forged in community service, the precision sharpened in law, the resilience born of activism, would prepare her for the moment Conway came for her throat. Crockett didn't need to scream. She didn't need to match fire with fire. All she had to do was remain herself, and in doing so, she would win not just the argument, but the hearts of those watching. The cameras rolled. Da, da. And the showdown began. Asterisk, the stage was set, the lights blinding, the cameras rolling. From the first question, it was clear this was not going to be a polite exchange of ideas. Kellyanne Conway leaned forward in her chair, ready to dominate. She cut in before the host had even finished speaking, her voice slicing through the air with a practiced sharpness. Each interruption was deliberate, a reminder that she was there not just to argue, but to overwhelm. "Let me stop you right there," she snapped, wagging a finger toward Jasmine Crockett. "You don't understand how this works. You don't know the first thing about running a country." Kellyanne's words cut like knives, but Jasmine's silence cut deeper. She didn't flinch. She didn't break eye contact. She simply let the storm rage. The hosts attempted to redirect, shuffling papers nervously, their voices strained with the effort of keeping order. "Let's allow Representative Crockett to respond," one of them said. But Conway wasn't finished. No, you don't just get to sit there and act like you've done something." Kellyanne's pitch climbed higher, her words tripping over each other. "All you people do is complain, whine, and play the victim. Meanwhile, the rest of us actually built something in this country." The audience audibly gasped. In living rooms across America, viewers leaned closer to their screens, stunned at the ferocity unraveling before them, and still, Jasmine Crockett did not raise her voice. She sat poised, her hands resting on the desk, her posture unbroken. The more Conway raged, the stronger her calmness appeared. It wasn't passive, it was intentional, like a shield absorbing blow after blow. Every second she withheld a reaction, the imbalance grew. Conway seemed desperate to provoke. Crockett seemed determined to deny her that satisfaction. Kellyanne's interruptions piled up. "Don't shake your head at me. Don't sit there and act like you're better than me." Her tone grew shriller, her composure fraying with every word. The studio's atmosphere was charged, buzzing with the kind of tension that makes time feel heavy. Finally, the inevitable happened. Kellyanne Conway, once hailed as the Queen of Spin, lost her grip on the performance. She screamed full volume, voice cracking under the weight of her own anger. The sound was raw, unfiltered, and shocking. It wasn't strategy anymore. It was desperation. The host froze, eyes darting nervously toward the control booth. The producers in the back scrambled, whispering into earpieces. The audience fell silent, their disbelief hanging in the air like fog. Millions at home reached for their phones, fingers racing to record the moment they knew would go viral. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat unmoved. No smirk, no shake of the head, no flicker of irritation, just calm, steady focus. The silence. Around her was louder than the scream, and then calmly, without raising her voice, Jasmine Crockett delivered the line heard around the world. The scream echoed for a moment that felt far longer than it was. In that silence, you could almost hear the collective gasp of the nation. Kellyanne Conway had unleashed her fury in full view of millions, and now all eyes shifted to Jasmine Crockett. What would she do? Would she fire back with equal force, or would she let the attack stand unanswered? She didn't rush. She didn't stumble over her words. She leaned back ever so slightly, a signal that she wasn't rattled, wasn't moved, wasn't about to be dragged into the chaos. Her eyes stayed locked on Conway's, unblinking, steady, and certain. It was the gaze of someone who had been here before, not in front of these exact cameras, but in confrontations where composure was the only weapon that mattered. The pause itself was the first blow. Crockett allowed the silence to stretch. Seconds, ticking like an eternity. Conway, red-faced and breathing heavily, tried to hold her glare, but the imbalance was clear. One woman was out of control. The other was in complete command. Then, Jasmine Crockett spoke. Her tone was low but firm, the kind of voice that forces a room to lean in. "Kellyanne," she began, drawing out the name with deliberate calm, "you can scream at me, you can insult me, but what you can't do, what you will never do, is erase the truth of who I am and what I stand for." She paused again. Words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. "See, I didn't come from a world of privilege or power handed down. I worked my way here. I fought for my community, defended people you don't even see, and I will not, under any circumstances, let your volume drown out my purpose." The studio went still. Even the hosts leaned back, their faces caught between shock and admiration. The contrast could not have been sharper, Conway's ragged voice still echoing in memory. Crockett's reply delivered like a steady drumbeat of dignity. Crockett leaned forward now, claiming the physical space that Conway had tried to dominate. "You talk about building something in this country. Well, let me tell you, my people built this country. And every time you try to shout us down, every time you try to erase us, you prove exactly why we keep fighting." A murmur rose from the audience, small at first, then swelling into audible applause. Some clapped cautiously, others openly, their hands breaking the tension that had suffocated the air moments earlier. But Crockett wasn't done. She glanced at the hosts, then back at Conway, her voice unwavering. "Respect doesn't come from screaming. It doesn't come from belittling others. Respect comes from standing firm in the truth, even when people like you try to twist it into alternative facts." The reference landed like a lightning bolt. The phrase Conway had introduced years earlier, the phrase that had haunted her reputation, was now being turned against her in real time. The audience erupted. Gasps mixed with laughter, applause broke into cheers. Phones captured every second. Kellyanne Conway's expression shifted. The smug confidence that had defined her for years began to falter. Her lips tightened, her eyes flickered, and for the first time in the exchange, she seemed unsure. Her weapon, her volume, had failed her. Crockett had dismantled it not by raising her own voice, but by holding her ground, layer by layer, truth by truth. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't deliver the line with venom. She delivered it with composure, with the calmness of someone who knew she had already won. Her reply wasn't just a clapback, it was a recentering of the conversation, a shift in gravity. And then, with perfect timing, she closed the moment. "You can scream as loud as you want," she said, her tone softer now, almost tender. "History will remember who spoke with dignity and who just screamed." The room fell silent again, but it was a different silence this time. It wasn't shock, it was awe. The audience had just witnessed something bigger than a heated debate. They had witnessed a line that would be replayed, quoted, and shared across. The country, the hosts visibly shaken, tried to regain their footing. One of them stammered, We need to go to a quick break," but by then it hardly mattered. The moment was already sealed. The clip was already viral in the making. Conway shifted in her seat, eyes darting to the cameras, as though realizing in real time that she had lost not just the argument, but the perception battle. Her scream, meant to dominate, had instead exposed weakness. Crockett's calm response had crystallized into a soundbite that would follow both women far beyond that studio. Viewers at home felt the power of it instantly. On couches and phones across the nation, people repeated Crockett's words aloud, nodding, cheering, even tearing up. For those who had felt silenced, overlooked, or erased, the moment was validation. Dignity had spoken louder than fury. And as Conway sat, visibly diminished, Crockett leaned back in her chair again, turning to the same serene composure she had started with. It was over. The counterattack had landed. The scream had been answered. And the hero of the story had claimed her victory without ever needing to shout. But the clash didn't end in that studio, because the internet had only just begun. The clip didn't just stay on television, it detonated across the internet, like a spark in dry grass. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, Twitter, or X as it is now called, was ablaze. Hashtags trended instantly. Hashtag Crockett.com, hashtag Screamgate, and the most biting of all, hashtag alternative facts meet reality. Thousands of tweets poured in by the second, replaying the confrontation from every possible angle. One viral post read, "Kellyanne screamed." Jasmine Crockett didn't even blink. That's the difference between chaos and class. Another tweet, accompanied by a freeze frame of Crockett's.com gaze, said simply, "This is what power looks like." On TikTok, the moment took on life of its own. Creators layered Conway's outburst over dramatic sound effects, turning her scream into a meme. Others edited Crockett's.com reply into motivational montages, pairing her words with swelling music and captions like "Never let their noise drown your truth." One edit, ending with Crockett's mic drop line about history remembering dignity, racked up millions of views overnight. Instagram reels filled with side-by-side comparisons, Conway's contorted rage contrasted with Crockett's serene composure. The aesthetic was undeniable. Rage versus restraint, fire versus stone. Fans flooded Crockett's comment sections with heart emojis, raised fists, and messages of gratitude. For many, it wasn't just entertainment. It was representation. A black woman standing her ground on live TV, refusing to be diminished, had become a cultural flashpoint. Meanwhile, Conway became the subject of late-night comedy. Hosts replayed the scream on loop, adding laugh tracks and cartoon sound effects. One quipped, "I've heard toddlers in a toy aisle keep it together better than that." The jokes stung, not because they were cruel, but because they captured a truth Conway couldn't escape. Her strategy had backfired spectacularly. Commentators on political talk shows couldn't ignore the moment either. Progressive voices praised Crockett's composure as a masterclass in dignity. Even some conservative analysts admitted begrudgingly that Conway had lost control of the narrative. One panelist summed it up bluntly: Crockett didn't just win the exchange. She changed the entire conversation. Celebrities chimed in, amplifying the clip to millions more. Ava DuVernay called Crockett's reply cinematic. Kerry Washington tweeted, "Strength is grace under pressure." Jasmine Crockett showed us all tonight. Even athletes joined in, posting Crockett's.com stare with captions like "Game Face." The clip crossed boundaries, reaching people who didn't normally tune into politics, who suddenly found themselves watching, sharing, and talking. The ripple effect was unmistakable. In classrooms, young students replayed the moment as an example of composure under fire. In community centers, activists shared the clip as a teaching tool, proof that calm could cut deeper than chaos. Crockett's words had become more than a rebuttal, they were a mantra. Conway, once known for spinning stories to her advantage, now found herself trapped inside one she couldn't control. Every meme, every remix, every late-night punchline chipped away at her aura of authority. The scream had become shorthand for a meltdown, a loss of control. Where Crockett gained admiration, Conway became a punchline. The contrast was undeniable, and people relished it. In an era where public figures often shout past each other, Crockett had demonstrated a different kind of power, measured, strategic, unshaken. That difference struck a chord across demographics, from young activists hungry for role models to older viewers who had grown weary of political noise. And as the internet amplified the moment, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a viral clip. It was a cultural mirror reflecting back what people craved to see: composure in the face of rage, dignity against derision, truth triumphing over noise. Yet beneath the memes and headlines lay a deeper lesson. When the noise faded and the laughter of memes gave way to reflection, Jasmine Crockett's response began to be seen for what it truly was. More than a viral exchange, more than a soundbite. It became a parable about dignity in an age of chaos. In a world where shouting often drowns out listening, Crockett reminded millions that composure is not weakness, it is strength. To sit in the eye of the storm, refusing to be shaken, is its own kind of power. Her calmness was not passive, was intentional. It was a declaration that leadership is not about who yells the loudest, but about who refuses to be pulled into the noise. Crockett's words resonated because they spoke to a universal hunger. People are tired of anger for its own sake. They are tired of politicians who mistake volume for vision, are looking for leaders who embody resilience, who carry the weight of their communities with steadiness, who can turn a moment of hostility into a lesson in grace. Crockett did that, and in doing so, she offered an example that stretched beyond party lines or political loyalties. Her reply reframed the debate as something far larger than Kellyanne Conway's scream. It became about what kind of country people want to live in. One where hate, derision, and arrogance set the tone, or one where dignity, truth, and calm define the future. That contrast struck deeply because viewers recognized it not just in politics, but in their own lives. Everyone has faced someone who tried to shout them down, someone who wielded noise as a weapon. Crockett's moment gave people a script for how to endure and overcome. Don't match their chaos, stand taller than it. And for immigrant families, marginalized communities, and those who have long been told to know their place, her composure carried special weight. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She represented an entire lineage of resilience, of people who faced noise, insults, and hostility, yet met it with unshakable resolve. Her calm reply said, "In essence, we are still. Here we will not be silenced, and our dignity is untouchable." The lesson extended to leadership itself. Real leaders are not those who dominate the airwaves with rage. Real leaders are those who can steady a room, command respect without demanding it, and remind people that truth needs no volume to be heard. Crockett embodied that lesson in one live moment that millions watched unfold. And so, the viral moment became more than a clip, it became a reminder. Kellyanne Conway may have screamed, but it wasn't the scream that carried across the nation. It was JasmineCrockett's.com. Reply. What began as a chaotic clash on live television became a defining moment of contrast. Noise versus composure. Arrogance versus dignity. And in the end, it was dignity that people chose to remember, replay, and share. The clip went viral not because of the chaos, but because of the calm. Crockett reminded us all that in a world overflowing with shouting, the voice that carries the furthest is often the one that refuses to rise to anger. Her words were steady, but they shook the room. Her composure was quiet, but it thundered. Across the country, that's the lesson worth carrying forward. Truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Dignity will always outlast noise. And history remembers those who stood firm with grace, not those who lost themselves in rage. So if you felt something watching this story unfold, if you saw yourself in JasmineCrockett's.com, let this moment be your reminder. In your own life, when the shouting grows loud, when chaos threatens to overwhelm, you have the power to stand firm, to stay steady, to let truth not volume speak for you. And if you believe more people need to see stories like this, where dignity triumphs over noise, make sure you subscribe, share this video, and join this community. Because every time we amplify moments of calm strength, we take a step toward a world where voices of truth are louder than screams of chaos. After all, Conway's scream may have made headlines, but it was Crockett's.com reply that made history.